I remember it like it was yesterday. It was over 30 years ago. It changed my life. We had recently moved to the United States from Israel. It's just another day at work. So I thought. A fellow employee, a born-again Christian, called me over to his cubicle. Unsuspecting, I went over. After some small talk, he took out his Bible and showed me Isaiah 53 and asked me what I thought. I'd never been big on Bible study, and this chapter left me in shock. It seemed to be speaking about Jesus. For the rest of the day, I could hardly keep focused. I had to get to the bottom of this. This video is about my discovery of the truth of Isaiah 53. Needless to say, as soon as I got home, I opened up my Hebrew Bible, my Tanach. I read through Isaiah 53 over and over, and with each read, an amazing revelation became clearer and clearer. This is what I found. A proclamation. How beautiful is it to see the feet of the heralder of good tidings and peace. Herald peace. Herald good. Herald salvation. He says to Zion, your God reigns. The voices of your watchmen raise their voices together in song because they will actually see God's return to Zion. O ruins of Jerusalem, burst out together in song because God has consoled his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem. God has revealed his holy strength in front of the eyes of the nations. And everyone, from one end of the earth to the other, will see our God's salvation. Turn away, it's in plural, turn away again, plural, from there and don't touch, again, plural, once more, any impure thing. Get out of there. Purify yourselves because you are the bearers of God's vessels. But don't leave in a hurry, people. And don't leave like you're running away from something. You know why? Because God is in front of you, all leading you, and God is protecting all of you from behind. You having nothing to fear when you leave those lands and return to Zion. Now we are introduced to the servant, the ones, in plural, who are returning to Zion. Behold, my servant will succeed. He will be exalted, really, really exalted. Now God addresses his servant. And just like there were so many who were so startled at your miserable state, at how you were barely recognizable as human beings, so too many nations will tremble. Their leaders will be speechless. And you know why? Because your redemption is something that they could never have ever imagined. They had always been taught that you were never going to be redeemed, and that I, your God, had rejected you. And they have just witnessed your redemption with their very own eyes. Chapter 53, those dumbstruck leaders speak. This is unbelievable. To whom did God reveal himself? To this nothingness that was like an insignificant plant in the middle of the desert? A shapeless nothingness with no splendor and with nothing pleasant about him. He's despised. His existence is one of pain and sickness, just as the curses of Deuteronomy 28:22, the Lord will strike you with wasting disease, with fever and inflammation, with scorching heat and drought, with blight and mildew, which will plague you until you perish. like someone who hides his face from us, as if we're supposed to pay any attention to him. You know what? The sickness that he suffered was because of us, our nations. We made him sick, and those pains that he suffered, we caused those pains. And all of this time, we thought that God was beating up on him and making him suffer because he rejected our God. Great googly moogly. We made him suffer. Our persecution of him was such a sin. We thought that by punishing him, we would bring peace upon our nations. We thought that every time we wounded him, that we were healing ourselves. Like sheep led astray, or each man to his own way, and we thought that he was the cause of all of our problems. And all along, God wanted him to suffer our wicked persecution of him, and we had no idea. The nations have concluded their confession, and God begins to speak. He, my servant, was beaten down and tormented, yet he didn't complain. Like a lamb to the slaughter and sheep to the shearing, he was silent. He did not complain. Those wicked nations, took away any legal recompense he may have had. And where were the people who should have raised a hue and a cry about this injustice? There were none. Because according to them, those wicked nations, my servant was not even given the right to live. This was a sin that the nations committed against them, my servant, in the plural. And oh, how he suffered because of it. And yet, my servant was condemned in death as wicked, and he was libeled as a wealthy man in his death. Yet he did nothing wrong and spoke no evil. And God desired to crush him and make him ill, to give him the opportunity to thrive if only he would accept his suffering. And if he accepts this suffering and sees it as an atonement for past sins, I, God Almighty, will ensure that he will see children and grandchildren and live a long life. Because I, God, want him to succeed. As he will see blessing from all of his soul's toil through all these eons, he will be satisfied and vindicated in the knowledge that he will bring many nations to see his suffering for exactly what it was. And just as his suffering was inflicted on him by those nations, so too will my servant lead those nations into righteousness. In conclusion, before all of the nations I will give him a portion among the nations, and he will take the spoil of those nations that he defeats, all in recompense for being brought so close to death, and because he was counted among the wicked in his death, and bore the sins of those nations. Remember what the leaders of those nations said in verse 3? Our persecution of him was a sin. He was their easy target. As I begin this series of videos, I invite you to follow me as I do a thorough examination of Isaiah chapter 53. We will see how the suffering servant of Isaiah 53, regardless of anything you may have ever heard, can only be about the righteous remnant of the nation of Israel. Please join me as we inquire and delve into the true meaning of the 53rd chapter of this amazing book. Thank you, Kol Tuv, and God bless.